A speaking test in any language is not a natural situation. You're being examined on how you perform, and you're being marked according to the words you use in the language you're learning. In this podcast, we aim to help you get the highest mark possible in your speaking by sharing some expressions that a native English speaker might use. And even if you're not taking a speaking test soon, we think you'll find these expressions useful in taking your English to the next level. Welcome to
Aprender Inglés with Reza and Craig.
Hello, and if you're a new listener to the podcast, you're very welcome. And if you've come back to listen again this week, thank you very much. My name's Craig.
And my name's Reza.
And with more than 50 years of teaching English between us, Reza and I will help you improve your English and take it to the next level. How are you doing, mate?
I'm doing very well, although slightly more tired than about 2 hours ago when we recorded the first podcast. I think we've explained to you before, listeners, that we generally meet and record 3 podcasts and then we release one each week. So we meet every 3 or 4 weeks or so. We're on the third one and it's a Friday evening, so I'm not as fresh as I was 2 hours ago, but I think I've still got it in me to make a decent podcast. What about you?
Well, you look quite fresh sitting there in your teaching shirt. I notice you've got a teacher's shirt today. Small checks.
Oh, yes, very good. Small checks.
So you are looking very fresh. And this week we're going to focus on speaking like a native. Some expressions to help you pass your English speaking exam if you're going to take one, but also to learn some new expressions that we think you'll like, because they're not the typical expressions you might find in an English course book. Now, we have given some advice and tips before, specifically for the Cambridge exams, the B2 First, the C1 Advanced exam, and the C2 Proficiency speaking tests. To listen to that podcast and get some specific advice, go to inglespodcast.com/483. Now, we don't think you need to learn all of these expressions we're going to tell you today, because even native English speakers, they have their favorite expressions that they often use. For example, one of the expressions on our list is, I beg to differ, but I don't think I've ever used that expression on a day-to-day basis. Just choose the expressions we're going to speak about here. Choose your favorite ones, write them down, make a note, practice them, and learn the ones you like. What's the first one, Reza?
Well, our first category of expressions is a way of saying, in my opinion. So you can say the words, in my opinion, but that's too easy. We thought of some more complicated ways of saying it.
You're not complicated, and more unusual, higher level.
Yeah, not even necessarily a higher level, just different. Just not so obvious to a foreign speaker, perhaps. But if you learn them, you'll impress any examiner or anybody listening to you a little bit more. Instead of just saying, in my opinion, 25 times, or I think, you could say, for example, to my mind. So, for example, to my mind, dark chocolate is far better than milk chocolate. Would you agree, Craig?
I would agree 100%. And as far as I'm concerned, you cannot eat a better chocolate than a dark chocolate of 70% cocoa. So there's another one for you. As far as I'm concerned. As far as I'm concerned also means in my opinion.
If you ask me, white chocolate is for people who don't even really like chocolate. I don't know why it exists. If you ask me, it's a way of saying, in my opinion.
Well, as I see it, white chocolate doesn't actually have any cocoa in it, as I see it. So those expressions can all be used as you would use, in my opinion, to my mind, as far as I'm concerned, as I see it, and if you ask me. Another example, if you ask me, passing the Cambridge C1 Advanced exam isn't as easy as some people think. What do you reckon?
I believe you're right. So I believe is another way of saying, in my opinion. I believe it's quite tricky. Or I could use a negative. I could say, I don't believe it's easy if you don't prepare in advance. I don't believe it's easy. In other words, my opinion is that it is not easy. I don't believe it.
I don't know if you noticed, but when I asked Reza for his opinion on my opinion, I said, what do you reckon? So, of course, I can say to Reza, Reza, what's your opinion? I could also say, Reza, what do you reckon? What do you reckon? Reckon, R-E-C-K-O-N. That's more commonly used in British English, but it's a very common expression when you want to ask for somebody's opinion. What do you reckon? It's like saying, what do you think?
Another one is, what are your thoughts? Let's find out. Craig, what are your thoughts on putting chorizo in Valencian paella?
I think Jamie Oliver quite likes the idea, because if you're a follower of Jamie Oliver's cooking program, you'll notice he loves putting chorizo in paella. But as far as I'm concerned, no, I don't think it works. Do you?
No, although I do like chorizo with paella, but to my mind, it doesn't blend with the other ingredients of a Valencian paella. But chorizo with rice, by all means. But you just better not call it a paella or you'll really irritate Valencians.
Another way of saying what's your opinion is what's your take, or what's your take on blah, blah, blah. For example, Reza, what's your take on the cookies we've just had with our tea?
I thought the chocolate ones were better than the plain ones. What's your view?
I believe you're right.
So Craig said, I believe for his opinion when I asked him, what's your view? Which is another way of saying, what's your take on something?
Now, if you agree with someone, you can, of course, say, I agree. Now, be careful because we very often hear the mistake from Spanish speakers, I'm agree. No, that's not correct. Agree is a verb, so it's I agree. If you want to say I'm, then you can use the noun. I'm in agreement with you. But another expression that's not so common is I'm with you on that. I'm with you on that. If Reza thinks the chocolate cookies were better, I can say, yes, Reza, I'm with you on that, which means I agree with you.
You could also say, I see what you mean. This word mean here is the verb. To mean is to try to convey something, to try to say something. So you could say, I see what you mean. Or you could emphasize it by adding the word exactly. That's a good word for agreement. I see exactly what you mean. I couldn't agree more.
I couldn't agree more is a very common way of agreeing with someone. If you were to speak more formal English, you might say, I'm in complete agreement with you. But more normal for conversational English, yeah, I couldn't agree more. I agree 100%.
You can even agree with someone with just one word. An adverb can be quite useful. You can simply say, exactly. For example, if someone says to me, the more chocolate in a chocolate biscuit, the better.
You took the words right out of my mouth. Not the cookies, but the words. You took the words right out of my mouth means I agree with you completely.
I knew Craig would say that.
I think we see eye to eye. If you see eye to eye with someone, you agree with them. You see the same thing. You see eye to eye. So another expression that's not so common, but very useful in English is we see eye to eye.
As well as the adverb exactly, you could say absolutely to show very strong agreement. Craig, the world would be a terrible place without chocolate, I think.
You took the words right out of my mouth. We definitely see eye to eye. So if you've noticed, listener, we are looking at the most common functions that you might be expected to use in an exam, a B2 first exam, for example. We've looked at giving your opinion, asking for your partner's opinion, agreeing with your partner. Now let's look at disagreeing, or ways to say, I don't agree with you. You could say, I beg to differ, which is a very formal expression, although I don't know if I would use that in a normal conversation, would you?
Occasionally, but only with someone that I knew quite well.
So you think it's informal?
I think it's informal if it's used in a funny way. Yeah. For example, imagine a friend of mine said to me, "Oh, you've already had 3 beers, Reza, on a Saturday night. I think you better go to bed, before you get drunk." And suddenly I produce in front of them a bottle of whiskey and I say, "I beg to differ."
So it's used sarcastically in a way.
Sarcastically with people you know well. But if it's used in its original sense, it's really quite formal. But that happens with quite a lot of things. They have the original formal meaning, or if you use it with good friends, they know that you're just being funny. You're being sarcastic, satirical. You're not really trying to be formal.
So it's kind of fake formality in a way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'll tell you one thing about it for sure. As an examiner, I'd let you say it once in an exam. Say it twice, and I'm going to start taking points off you, not giving them to you. Because you don't say that twice in a conversation. So listeners, be very, very careful. If you're doing an exam, 1, I beg to differ. Okay. Say it again 20 seconds later. You're not impressing me because that's not authentic. It's lost its effect. It's clear that you've just learned it as an interesting thing to say. All right, but if you say it twice, then it's not interesting. It's now boring and has lost its effect. So don't use it more than once. That's the problem with the more dramatic ones.
And I think that's true certainly at higher levels, at C1 and C2 level. You don't want to be repeating these expressions time and time again, which is one reason we're highlighting and focusing on different ways of saying the same thing so that you have a selection of expressions you can use in a conversation or in an exam so that you can show you have a wide vocabulary. Now, there's one thing that British people love to do when they disagree, and that's apologise for disagreeing. So, of course, you can say, I disagree, although an English speaker might say, I'm afraid I disagree, or I'm sorry, but I disagree. So remember that slight, small apology before you're disagreeing with your partner. I'm afraid I disagree. I'm afraid I beg to differ.
When you ask someone's opinion, you can ask them how they see it. How do you see it? What's your opinion? And you can agree by saying, we see eye to eye, as Craig said earlier. But if you don't agree, you can say, I don't see it like that. So by see here, we mean I don't agree. I don't see it like that. Or you could say, that's not how I see it. For example, Craig, that glass there looks half empty to me. Would you agree?
No, I'm more of an optimist. I think it's half full. That's not how I see it. Another way to disagree, which is quite soft, it's not a very strong disagreement. You could say, I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure about that. That's a polite way of disagreeing. And then you'd go on, you'd continue to say why you don't see it like that, why you're not sure about that, why you disagree.
If you like something, particularly if you like it a lot, that's a good excuse to use some interesting vocabulary, very positive vocabulary. So instead of just saying, I like that a lot, you could say, I'm really keen on dunking my biscuits in my tea.
What does dunking mean?
Dunking.
Dunking donuts.
You'll find this word, I'm sure, on quite a few episodes we've recorded, but I can't remember the numbers right now. It's putting a biscuit in a liquid, preferably tea or coffee or hot chocolate or milk, to dunk, to dip it. So I'm really keen on dunking biscuits in tea.
We're both very fond of dunking. In fact, you could say that we're avid dunkers.
We are avid dunkers, yeah.
The adjective avid, A-V-I-D, kind of means keen. So you can be an avid photographer, which means you're really enthusiastic about photography and taking photos. You can be an avid reader, which means you love reading. So if you're an avid something, you really like doing it, you're fond of it.
Craig, I heard a long time ago that you were a big fan of Mickey Mouse. Is it true?
I have heard that rumour as well, although it hasn't been confirmed. It hasn't been verified yet by the BBC, but there is a rumour out there that I'm into Mickey Mouse. Now, that's not physically into Mickey Mouse. If you're into something, you like it very much. For example, Reza is into music. He's really fond of music. I'm into podcasting. I really enjoy looking at microphones and testing equipment connected to podcasting. So if you're into something, you really, really like it. You're an avid whatever.
Or, as Craig said, you can also be a big fan of something. It doesn't have to be of a football team. If you support Real Madrid, you're a Real Madrid fan. But it's for other things as well. Craig and I are both big fans of good quality chocolate biscuits. We are big fans. We like them very much.
We're both big fans of the Blacklist TV series.
Yes, that's a TV series we'd both like to recommend. The Blacklist. Try it. It's really good.
There's nothing we like more than sitting down after a hard day's teaching and watching an episode of The Blacklist. There's nothing I like more than blah, blah, blah. You can use that in an exam. It's a good way to express that you're keen on something. There's nothing I like more after lunch than having a nice siesta.
Craig, would you say that computer games or video games are your thing?
No, I'm not really keen on computer games on purpose, because I think if I played computer games or I experimented with them, I'd get hooked on them. And if you get hooked on something, that means you kind of get addicted to it. You can't stop doing it. So I have quite an addictive personality, which is why the chocolate thing keeps coming up and appearing. So I preferred not to play video games and keep away from them. So I'm not very fond of them. What about you?
No, I'm not fond. It's not my thing. But like you, chocolate biscuits are my thing. If something's your thing, you like it a lot.
If you're taking an exam in English, very often you have to choose between two different photographs, for example, or you have to reach a conclusion with your partner and choose one thing over another thing. So you can say, I choose this, and you can say, I choose that, but that's quite basic English. You can also say, I would go with. For example, if I had to choose between a piece of chocolate cake and a Victoria sandwich, I would go with the chocolate cake. What about you, Reza? What would you go with?
Victoria sponge or chocolate cake? If I had to choose, then chocolate cake. Though I do like Victoria sponge, but if I had to choose, then I would go with chocolate cake. Yeah.
So you'd pick the chocolate cake?
I would. And you? It goes without saying.
It goes without saying I would choose. If I had to choose, then I would pick the chocolate cake. So to pick is a synonym of choose. You can pick something over something else.
Craig, are you always so sure about your choices? What about this? You've got an amazing handcrafted artisan, very dark chocolate biscuit sandwich, chocolate sandwich biscuit with dulce de leche in the middle, or you've got exactly the same with cherries in the middle. Ooh, which one would you prefer?
That's very, very difficult. I'm not sure. Now, I can say I'm not sure. I can also say I can't make up my mind. If you make up your mind, you decide something. If you can't make up your mind, you're indecisive. So I'm sorry, Reza, if I had that choice, I don't think I would be able to make up my mind. I would be on the fence. What does that mean? On the fence.
Well, a fence is like a wall, but it's in the middle of the countryside or a garden. So it might be made out of metal or wood. It shows a division. It shows a division on land. So if you're on the fence, you are neither one side nor the other. In other words, you can't decide. Because you could say both options sound equally good. The chocolate sandwich biscuit with the dulce de leche or with the cherries. Both options sound equally good to me. It's hard to decide. I can't make up my mind.
My wife said to me last week that she wanted a weekend away. She fancied going away for a couple of days at the weekend, either to Barcelona or to Madrid. And she asked me which I would go with. So I'm on the fence. I'm not sure. Both cities are beautiful. Both cities are lovely. But I'm on the fence. I can't make up my mind. Which one would you pick?
Barcelona or
Madrid.
Madrid. When?
For a weekend.
Weekend. What time of year?
Now, November.
Maybe Barcelona, simply because it's one of the few months of the year that there won't be too many tourists there. That's my answer.
You do realise we've now lost all of our listeners from Madrid.
Oh no, but I would go to Madrid in the spring for sure. So from March onwards, I would go to Madrid rather than Barcelona. But November, I think Barcelona. Yeah.
There's something else I'm on the fence about as well. Maybe you can help me, Reza. You know, I do these teaching courses, conversation courses for students. We're in November. As I said, we're getting close to Christmas. Shall I continue the courses during the Christmas period and into the new year? Or shall I break for Christmas and start them again after the 6th of January, which is the Three Kings holiday? I can't make up my mind. What do you think?
Yes, it's hard to decide, isn't it? If I were you, I think I would leave it in the hands of the students. Get them to vote on it.
That's a very good idea. Now, you also give private one-to-one classes on the internet to listeners of the podcast. Have you decided what to do over Christmas? Are you continuing to work or are you taking a break?
I've decided to do nothing. My mind's already made up. Definitely nothing. Sorry. No classes from me from about the 20th of December till about the 8th of January.
So you're not on the fence?
Not on the fence, no. I'm a big fan of Christmas breaks.
So if you want to contact Reza for private classes not at Christmas, Reza, what services are you offering and how can people get in touch with you?
Well, as you know, Craig gives small groups, but my thing is more one-to-one. So speaking would be what we'd concentrate on. But apart from that, the class could be tailor-made, could be adjusted to whatever extra focus you would like to put on it. It might be writing, it might be reading, grammar, vocabulary, whatever, pronunciation. If you're interested, send me an email and we could maybe talk about further details. Send it to belfastreza@gmail.com.
And if you prefer to study in a small group of lovely people, why not join one of my conversation classes? I'm personally a big fan of conversation classes using Zoom on the internet because you can maximize the speaking time of the students using the breakout rooms. So if you're interested in improving your confidence, your fluency when you're speaking English, get in touch with me. I might be teaching over Christmas. I'm on the fence. Haven't decided yet, but there will definitely be courses in December and in January and throughout next year. So my email address is Craig, CRAIG, @inglespodcast.com. Send me an email and I will give you more details. Reza, what's our next expression?
Well, it's about changing your mind. So we talked about making decisions, about choosing things or not being sure. But once you have chosen something, you can always change your mind. You might not be happy with your first decision. And a very nice and useful expression for that is come to think of it. So when you say come to think of it, you're about to now reflect on a previous decision you made and change your mind. So, for example, imagine I decided to go for the chocolate sandwich biscuit with the dulce de
Dulce de
leche.
leche.
But then I realized, but I had dulce de leche yesterday. So come to think of it, no, I'll go for the cherry filling. Yeah, I've changed my mind because I don't want to eat too much dulce de leche. So come to think of it, make it the cherry, please. A change of mind.
Maybe you're right after all. There's another one for you. Maybe you're right after all. Maybe you're right after all. Remember, you can see all of these expressions in the show notes at inglespodcast.com/494.
Another one is now that I think about it. So you've already made a decision, but you've thought a little bit more. So now you're maybe going to make a different decision. So I said earlier in November, go to Barcelona. You know what? Now that I think about it, Madrid might be better because Barcelona's a bit humid. And I've got, slightly bad articulations, joints. And the cold, humid weather doesn't really agree with me. So now that I think about it, because of the climate, Madrid would be better for me in the winter because it's drier there. Yeah.
Now that you mention it, there's another one. Now that you mention it, Reza, it can be quite cold in November in both Barcelona and Madrid. So on second thoughts, maybe it will be better to go to the south of Spain, to somewhere like Sevilla, where my friend Jose might show me around the town. Hello, Jose. So, on second thoughts is another expression which is kind of changing your mind. You're thinking again, you're having a second thought.
Yeah.
So now that you mention it, or on second thoughts.
That's a good idea, Craig. But then again, I've already been to Seville. I've never been to the Canary Islands, and I understand that it's lovely there all year round. Should I go there? I think I might.
It sounds like you're on the fence, Reza. You can't decide one way or the other.
So the last one I mentioned was then again, meaning, yeah, but here's another idea, which is different to what I had before. Then again, I could leave the peninsula and go to the Canary Islands.
Now, when you're speaking in an exam or in any situation in English, sometimes you want to add extra information. And of course, you can use the word also. But you can also say, what's more? For example, I'm thinking of going to Seville because it's warmer in November. There are lots of things to do. What's more, I know Jose who lives there, so I can go and visit him.
On top of that, Seville is great for tapas. Did you know that, Craig?
I did know that.
So on top of that adds more information, and it's an amazing cultural center into the bargain.
Into the bargain. Isn't bargain ganga in Spanish?
That's right. Yeah, if you use the word bargain in another context, that means bargain. For example, I bought a second-hand car which runs really well for €200 and it's guaranteed for 10 years. What a bargain, una ganga. But it doesn't mean that in this special expression. The fixed expression into the bargain means simply and also, here's an added thing. So Seville has great weather. What's more, Jose will be there. On top of that, there's the tapas and there's the incredible cultural heritage into the bargain.
So instead of saying also, keep repeating the same word, use those expressions to vary when you're speaking English, to vary your vocabulary. What's more, on top of that, and into the bargain.
Can I just go back, though, to something I said earlier? If it's a very striking expression, something that really grabs your attention, something a bit different, like into the bargain, it's a bit like I beg to differ. Remember, don't use that more than once in an exam because it loses its effect. Would you say so? So
yep.
If I was speaking to my partner in an exam, I could say once, yeah, you're right, we could do this and that, into the bargain. But if I say it a second time, the examiner's thinking, such a distinct expression, into the bargain. He's just putting it in there to show off that he can use it. And then it loses its effect. So for our more unusual expressions, like into the bargain or I beg to differ, use them sparingly. Sparingly means not too much, or they'll lose their effect just every once in a while. I would say no more than once in a speaking exam, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Another point to make, I think, is into the bargain tends to be at the end of the phrase, not necessarily at the beginning. So it was a cheap holiday into the bargain. So the into the bargain will come at the end of the phrase, not at the beginning of the sentence. Now, sometimes when you're speaking, you want to emphasize the fact that you're being honest. Now, maybe you shouldn't need to do that, but in English, we do it all the time, don't we? To be honest, I've just done it there. You see, I said to be honest. Everybody says to be honest. Although you don't have to keep saying to be honest. You could slightly change the expression and use in all honesty. So, in all honesty, Reza, I really enjoy podcasting with you.
Oh, thanks. Me too.
What, with you or with me?
with you. The podcasting experience is the highlight of meeting you. But if I'm being honest, I also enjoy the really good food I get as well. It's a tradition when I come to Craig's flat to record a podcast that quite often we have a meal and it's delicious, or a really nice homemade biscuit or two, as we had today. So podcasting is the number one objective. But if I'm being honest, I do look forward to the food as well, if I'm being honest.
Well, to tell you the truth, Reza, I only eat well when you come here. Usually I'm eating bread and water. No, that's not true. I'm not being honest. I do eat well, but I eat especially well when you come to podcast.
The truth is, Craig, me too. This is where I eat best.
The truth is, the best thing about podcasting is the food.
Quite frankly, Craig, if it weren't for recording these podcasts, we probably wouldn't be as fat as we are. We would probably have fairly good bodies, but because we do podcast once or twice a month, the result is we have, let's say, slightly larger bellies than we should.
We wouldn't be so fat and we wouldn't be so happy. So there you have a selection of expressions, all really meaning to be honest. You can say in all honesty, if I'm being honest, to tell you the truth is, and quite frankly. And there's one more, to be frank is another common expression. To be frank, I think that this podcast is quite useful.
Now, to show contrast or some kind of concession, that means there's the good side and the bad side of something. You probably already know the expression nevertheless, which is really just a fancy version of but, isn't it? For example, Valencia has a great climate most of the year, but in July and August it can be a bit too hot. I could say there, nevertheless, July and August are not so great. We've also got despite or despite that. For example, it was raining all day. Despite that, we went out for a walk. So we ignored the rain, despite that. But they're pretty common ones. They're fine, they're okay. But let's see if we can use a few more. Craig, have you got any handy expressions up your sleeve?
You could use be that as it may. Be that as it may. So there you have 5 words, be that as it may, which pretty much means the same as nevertheless, or despite that. For example, quite frankly, war is a terrible thing. Nobody likes to see pain. Nobody likes to see suffering and death. Be that as it may, every country has the right to defend itself.
Another one is having said that. Now, Craig and I have already said that the truth is we do eat more chocolate biscuits than we should. In all honesty, we're probably addicted. Having said that, there are much worse addictions. We're not addicted to cocaine or heroin, you know? So having said that, here's the contrast. It's not the end of the world to be addicted to chocolate biscuits. It isn't heroin.
There are worse addictions. That said, it's not doing a lot for our waistline or our weight. So that said is another expression that's similar to nevertheless. Having said that, or that said.
Craig mentioned earlier the fact that war is not very nice. Nobody really wants to have a war. Everybody agrees that war is terrible. True as that may be, there have been moments in history where there was no choice but to go to war. I'm thinking of the Second World War. All the other European countries just couldn't let the Nazis take over the whole world, could they? So nobody wanted a war. War is bad. True as that might be, or true as that may be, sometimes it's unavoidable. So true as that might be, or true as that may be, is another way of contrasting the positive and negative, or the good and the bad in something.
These days and nowadays are very common when you're speaking about things that are happening at the moment, at present. But an expression that isn't so common is in this day and age, especially if you're speaking generally about the state of the world. For example, in this day and age, with the advances of technology, it's difficult to know the difference between fake news and real news. So I'm using in this day and age to reflect the fact I'm speaking about the present time, nowadays or these days.
Another one to talk about typical tendencies or fashions is in the current climate. It's quite often used in a negative way. For example, Craig mentioned fake news. In the current climate of fake news stories, it's hard to know what's fact and what's fiction. In the current climate. So in the current climate, meaning these days, nowadays, the way things are in the current climate.
But that's not necessarily referring to weather. That could be anything. It could be the general state of the world. And you can also say in today's world as well, as a way of introducing what's happening at the moment. In today's world, unfortunately, there are wars all over the globe. So those expressions can be substituted for these days or nowadays, but one thing to emphasize is if you're speaking about your own personal experience, your life, then it's better to use these days and nowadays. For example, I don't read many books these days. It doesn't sound quite right, does it, Reza, to say, I don't read many books in the current climate, or I don't read many books in this day and age. It doesn't sound right for personal use.
Yeah, and also in today's world wouldn't sound right. All those are kind of to introduce big themes, aren't they? Not for personal things. That's right. A very important thing to bear in mind, because if it's a speaking exam and you've been asked about your personal life, well then, as Craig said, it would be inappropriate to use those other phrases. So do bear in mind if it's a personal question or about a bigger issue.
But if you're speaking about a larger issue like climate change, for example, it's very acceptable to say in this day and age, we need to watch and be careful of our carbon footprint, for example. So have you taken an English exam recently? If you have, why don't you send us a voice message and tell us how it went? And are you preparing to take a speaking exam soon? If you are, why not get in touch with Reza to help you prepare personally with a teacher to help you get a good mark in your exam? Reza, how can people contact us by voice message?
If you want to leave a voice message, you've got up to a minute and a half, 90 seconds on SpeakPipe. There is a link in the show notes. It's speakpipe.com/Ingles podcast. And that allows you to record yourself and leave a message for us to listen. Remember, it's a maximum of 90 seconds.
If you prefer to send an email, you can reach me. I'm Craig, Craig, at inglespodcast.com, or send your emails to Reza at belfastreza, Reza, at gmail.com. And we remind you that this podcast is sponsored in part by mansioningles.com. Why not visit the online store? And there you will find a selection of courses that will help you improve your English. Go to store.mansioningles.net.
As always, we'd like to say thanks to our Patreon supporters. Patreon, that's Patreon. And you can join the Patreon program for as little as $1.50 per month. And if you do that, as a way of saying thank you, you'll get instant access to the transcriptions of the audio of this podcast. If you're interested, have a look at the link in the show notes to patreon.com/Inglespodcast.
And in all honesty, we don't have time to mention all of you by name, but we would like to say thank you and mention our latest Patreon supporters. And they are Maria Rosario, Erisbel Marquez, Teresa Gil de Viedma, Esteban, Silvia, Miguel Lopez Costella, Lucia Gonzalez, and Dancho. Thank you to you and to everybody who's supporting us on Patreon. What's next week, Reza?
I have to tell you, Craig, that in all honesty, I've no idea. Do you know?
Well, I would go with asking the listener what they would like to hear. So if you have any ideas or suggestions for future podcasts, why not send us a voice message and tell us what you'd like us to speak about. And we've just told you how you can do that by voice message. So until we hear from you, we'd like to say thank you for listening. Have a wonderful week. It's goodbye from Reza.
And it's goodbye from Craig.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please tell your friends so that more people can listen. And the music in this podcast was by Pitts. The track is called See You Later.